John Lewis, GSK and British Land are among dozens of companies which have decided to pause or cancel their membership of the CBI after the organisation was rocked by allegations of sexual misconduct. The organisation is now suspending key activities until June, while allegations of rape are investigated. The CBI says it's to carry out a root and branch review of its culture. Separately, the CBI's Director General, Tony Danker, has been fired for alleged misconduct. Mr Danker denies all the allegations. The City of London Police launched an investigation following Mr Danker's sacking and the suspension of 3 others. For nearly 60 years, the CBI has been a strong link between the government and business, representing nearly 200,000 organisations and 7 million employees. It lobbies the government on regulation and policies that keep British business both working and competitive. Apart from the allegations, the former editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, Patience Wheatcroft, says the CBI's time has passed and it's no longer fit for purpose. She says it's increasingly difficult for the business lobby group to represent big companies like Amazon and small and medium-sized enterprises. So Andy Mayer is the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sir Vince Cable is, of course, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he served in Cabinet as Business Secretary. Andy, welcome to GB News. You must have had a lot of contact with the CBI. Did anything in your experience with the CBI prepare you for the series of scandals in which it's now embroiled?
Well, it's very regrettable. I mean, I've been dealing with the CBI on and off and previously from being public affairs head in major corporations for about 15 to 20 years. And most of the work of the CBI is not this high-profile headline stuff we're seeing at the moment, but it's very low-level, detailed regulatory affairs work, where they're looking at the entire business operating environment and trying to find areas of common ground between businesses where regulations are causing difficulties, such as blocking innovation or discouraging investment and growth. And those areas of the business are mundane and unremarkable. And it's the side of the business which is more social, which is trying to bring people together in settings which maybe a lot of alcohol is involved, where behaviour has not necessarily been put under proper controls, and they've not dealt with that properly. And that's the scandal they're now facing, not just the incidents themselves, but their failure to deal with them properly.
When I was in government, Andy, I worried that government got its feed from business through a very limited number of sources, which might not be properly representative. And more recently, I would have been concerned, were I still a minister, that the CBI had taken very strong political stands. Obviously, it was in favour of Remain. It was also against Scottish independence. Do you think it's done itself favours by taking clear political positions?
Well, those positions will have come, as you say, from a handful of sources, usually at the most senior level on their highest level committees. And in the case of Scottish independence, they clearly messed up because they alienated large swathes of Scottish business. In the case of the Brexit debate, they were a little bit more nuanced, but not much. But the dominant view of many of the corporations who pay most of the fees to the CBI was that Remain should win. And they decided to take a stronger stance. In the company I was in, we took a different stance, which was to keep the chief executives out of it and let people work out these things themselves by letting both campaigns talk to employees directly. And that was actually far more effective for Remain because it let people persuade each other rather than being given a moral lecture by somebody in a senior position. So in that view, the CBI actually took the wrong approach and probably helped the Leave campaign in the way they approached it. But generally, if you're a general business group, you shouldn't be getting involved in controversy. You should stick to the knitting and try and help the general business operating environment.
Sir Vince Cable, did you, as I did, experience any discomfort that you might be, that your sources of information and lobbying from business might be too few and too narrow?
Well, there was sometimes discomfort, but not for that reason. My experience of the CBI was the period of Richard Lambert and mainly John Cridland, who were very professional, and the CBI gave good technical advice on things like executive pay, women on boards, which I found valuable. But I regularly saw the Institute of Directors, the engineering employers, the Small Business Federation, and I got a wide range of views. I think where Patience Wheatcroft is right is that times have changed. I mean, the very big international companies, the Amazons and Shells and BPs, have no reason to work through the CBI, and there are very effective sectoral bodies for retail, chemicals, the car industry, advanced engineering. They don't need the CBI, and if it's a small company, they're better working through the Federation of Small Business. So the fact that the CBI has always been there doesn't mean it should always continue to be there.
Vince, did you ever have a feeling that they were getting too much into an undergrowth of, diversity, climate change, gender issues, things that, you might reasonably think were pretty secondary to their main task?
Well, no, as I said, in their dealings with me, they were always very practical and dealing with real issues. I mean, you mentioned gender issues. I mean, the one big concern we had when I was in government and I was leading this was to try to get more diversity on the boards of big companies, and particularly women. We set an objective of 30% and indeed achieved it. And the CBI was supportive, and as indeed other business leaders were. And that seemed to be an entirely proper intervention. And it was driven not politically, but by a sense of what is good business.
Let me ask Andy on that point. Did they get into a sort of woke undergrowth, do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the thing to understand about the CBI to staff level is it's a very shrewd recruiting ground for people who otherwise would be working for political parties or in other campaign groups. So we did once describe it as being the NUS for adults, because there was quite a degree of overlap between these people who would otherwise have been working as spads for a Labour government, who had been shut out of that opportunity for a decade. And often you will get people bringing those agendas with them and not necessarily asking the right questions or having the understanding of business at a detailed level where those political priorities were not necessarily appropriate. So we could see that in the reaction of most of corporate Britain, corporate America, and organisations like the CBI to the Black Lives Matter protests. The instant reaction was not, are they making a good point, but how is it relevant to business? It was, we must do as much as possible to see that we're on side, which has caused an enormous number of problems with inappropriate training and diversity, equity, inclusion being imposed, some of which is not actually helpful towards the goals of being anti-discrimination. So there, CBI and others have been asleep on the job. And the same was true with Brexit. The approach was just not thinking through that the other side might win, and therefore would they be ready to actually give a new Brexit-led government good advice in the same way they've been given the previous one.
Let me just change the subject for a moment with Sir Vince Cable. A quick reaction, a quick one, please, Vince, to the Raab civil servant crisis.
Well, I thought Nigel Nelson summarised the arguments very well. This was, there clearly was bullying. As he also said, as you said, standards have changed. I mean, 20 years ago, the behaviour in government, in business, in schools, in the armed forces would have been very different. And what we now regard as bullying would have been regarded as normal. But Raab has clearly failed to understand the way that modern organisations function. And there's, if it had just been one or two complaints, I would be inclined to support your view that we've got a few rather oversensitive individuals. But there were large numbers. Solly's report only went into several of them. And it seems to me he's failed. He's been arrogant, and his response rather reinforces that and has paid the price for it. What I sincerely hope is that we don't get, as a reaction to this, a sort of lurch into politicisation of the civil service. I was a Secretary of State in very difficult conditions, having to make large cuts in staff. The civil service were very loyal, politically impartial. I wouldn't want that to be fundamentally undermined by a revenge for Dominic Raab.